The following account is taken from a childhood memory of mine. The memory of one Monday afternoon that would drastically alter the course of my life. Admittedly, I'm reluctant to remember it, but I'm motivated by the idea of finally gaining some closure over my parents' deaths and the nature of such. If anyone has any information surrounding this instance or any of a related nature, I would very much appreciate it if you could get in touch with me. To those of you who are not familiar with the events in question, then let this serve as a simple warning. The following account is not for the faint-hearted, nor for those who are easily offended. When I was around 6 or 7 years old, my grandmother took me to one of her neighbor's yard sales. I say it was her neighbor's, rather it was his family who had arranged it in order to sell the possessions he left after his death a few months prior. The result was a collection of oddities, collected over years of travel, along with some heirlooms left to him by his father. Among these were medals from both world wars, a pocket watch with a cracked face that had stopped ticking at 3:23, an old phonograph complete with wax cylinders that had never been played before, and a baseball flung through the air of a bygone age. As a child, I was completely uninterested in such things, and instead continued up the table nearest the house. It was there that my eye caught sight of a friendly face. A teddy bear, with eyes of black beads staring at me, and a cheeky grin sewn onto its stuffed face. However, what interested me about the bear was its unique composition. The years had obviously taken their toll, and pieces of it had been torn off under whatever set of circumstances. In what had obviously been an effort to repair the bear, pieces of other stuffed animals had been stitched onto it to fill in the torn-away gaps, as it were. The different colors making the seams obvious. A single toy rabbit ear hung on one side of its head, while the foot of a dinosaur made up its left leg, along with other bits and pieces of material that I couldn't really identify. Needless to say, I had to have it. On the car ride home from my grandmother's, I thought up the name that would haunt me for the next 23 years. Patches. It was nice to have a friend. We went everywhere with each other. Walks, vacations, long car rides. Neither of us needed to have spoken. We merely felt the bond of loving friendship, like you do with your first stuffed animal. His large black eyes and mismatched body parts would always bring me comfort. Only now do I realize why. You see, when you're a kid, you are constantly learning from those around you. Friends, family, even strangers. We incorporate their characteristics into our everyday lives, sewing them into our own personalities. And, in the end, they form the people we grow up to be. We are all chimeras, parts of other people brought into one solitary individual. It seemed, though, that I had a knack for picking up the worst characteristics in everybody. My dad's lack of anything interesting to say, my aunt's screeching laugh, my mother's mistrust of ethnic minorities. That's why I loved Patches. Only he could share this with me. He, too, was a hybrid of all the worst parts. His outside represented my inside. One day, my mother, father, and I were walking in the woods near our house. We lived at the edge of town, so the woods continued on for a far distance beyond where we would normally take long walks. I don't remember much of what we did or where we went in the woods. but I vividly recall the sickening feeling I had when we approached the gate leading out. Patches, who had been around my shoulders at the time in a piggyback, was no longer there. I burst into tears, trying frantically to remember where I had dropped him. My dad backtracked through where we had come, but to no avail. Patches was gone. I remember running, breaking away from my mother and down the route where my father had recently returned from, scouring the undergrowth for any sign of my lost companion. By this time it was getting dark, the sun having set behind the towering trees, and we would have to go home. However, before my parents caught up to me, I noticed something moving in the ferns and fallen leaves. It moved erratically, almost in spasms, unlike any bird, fox, or other woodland animal that I have ever seen since. However, I couldn't see its body, its movements only made visible by its impacts with the plant life, like the wake of a boat that had already crossed the horizon. I couldn't stop crying that night. I laid awake into the early hours, wishing, praying for my best friend to return to me. I didn't stop crying the next morning. I didn't stop crying on my way to school, during school, or on the bus ride home from school. My eyes were red, raw from constant rubbing. It was mid-November, and by the time the school bus dropped me off at home, it was well into the twilight hour. Something was wrong. The air was funny, as it is after a long thunderstorm, despite it being good weather all day. The front door was open, which never happened in case Molly, our dog, got out onto the road. I walked into silence. The kitchen was desolate, although my mother was always in there at this time making dinner. Nobody had bothered to turn on any of the lights either. So, being the responsible little boy that I was, I made my way into the living room and switched the tall lamp on. I don't know what I felt next. In hindsight, it was horrific. But at that precise moment, I cannot honestly tell you what I felt. It was a bloodbath. Our cream carpet was stained red, blood already slightly drying and turning brown. What appeared to be chunks of flesh littered our floor, along with what looked like teeth, both canine and human. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I was paralyzed, too scared to even breathe. I dream of what happened next quite often. It permeates my sleep. Its timeless sound reaching my ears to wake me up screaming. Yet I still don't know how to describe it. The best I can come up with is this. Imagine the sound of a foghorn, mixed with some form of moaning, with hints of slurred speech commonly associated with recent stroke patients, although the words are lost to the ears. This sound was followed by a dragging noise, and some dull thuds, followed by wet splats. I didn't know what to do or what to say. All I could do was watch as the thing rounded the door and joined me in the living room. I only glanced at it, That was enough. It stood there, a mess of flesh, bone, and blood. From its head dangled a rabbit's ear, probably from the woods, along with other parts of woodland animals to give form to some makeshift limbs. A poorly formed ribcage stuck out in odd angles from its chest, as if it had been turned inside out. Its lower jaw was that of a dog's, later identified as Molly's, flopping up and down with sickening waving motions as it tried to form words. The top half of its head was made from a human skull. My father's. Although it had taken the skin from my mother's face and crudely soldered it over the right eye socket. Nestled in its face were two black eyes. Molly's eyes. They stared back at me in both numbing despair and pleading sympathy. That's when everything came back to me. I ran straight across the room, screaming until I tasted blood at the back of my throat, and out into the backyard, slamming the back door behind me. As I ran, I could hear the thing moaning and shouting some slurred, gargled words after me, which I would only be able to make out in hindsight. I stumbled and fell as I made my way through the backyard, hearing it slamming itself against the screen door, gurgling screams and cries after me. I did not go back to that house. I ran to my grandmother's, 2 miles away. Hours later, they cordoned it all off. Forensic scientists and police were all over it. They never told me exactly what they had found. All I gathered was that they found the creature lying at the back door where I had left it. Obviously, it had no knowledge of how to operate doors, and so had slammed its head against the doorframe multiple times, fracturing its skull. My dad's skull. You didn't need to be a doctor to point out the cause of death. It couldn't have lived for over a few hours. Its bastardized mimicry of the human body was simply too crude to allow its survival. The creature's existence defied all possible reasoning. It's probably why they kept it quiet. All that could be concluded was that nothing human had part in its creation. The only piece of evidence found was an object held in the creature's right hand, formed out of half of my mother's hand and a badger's claw. It was a stuffed bear composed of multiple parts, with a bunny ear on the right side of its head, and 2 black eyes staring back. I don't know what that thing was. All I can think of is the small thing rummaging through the undergrowth, whatever it may have been. It butchered my parents. My dog. Yet, somehow I still felt sorry for that sad form that lay at my back door that Monday afternoon. For in those gargled screams lay 2 distinct words. 2 words that lie in the back of my mind and wait to torment me in the night. Patches.